Newsfirst, Newsline.
Hello there, a very good evening and welcome to another edition of Newsline Live. Of course, it is the Sinhala and Tamil New Year, a time of joy and happiness, and on behalf of the Newsfirst team and the production team of Newsline Live, let me wish each and every one of you a very, very happy Sinhala and Tamil New Year. And also let me take this opportunity to wish our guest tonight, the former Director of Administration in Parliament, Mr. Lasil De Silva, a very happy Sinhala and Tamil New Year, sir.
You too, all the very best, and I'm pleased to be with you back again after a long time.
Definitely, sir, after quite some time. Getting back to the content, of course, of our discussion here today. You are a former Director of Administration in Parliament. Not just from the time that you were the Director of Administration, but you have been a part of the public sector, a part of the parliamentary staff for quite some time. Since your time in Parliament, when you look at the way that Parliament has been functioning during that time, and when you look at the way that Parliament is functioning today, what do you really feel? And I'm specifically referring to a new manner of protesting that has formed in the Parliament of Sri Lanka, and this is not in form of debate or discussion or legal objections being raised in Parliament, but a mere raising of banners and more like moving out of the traditional parliamentary procedure to voice their protest. Is this really healthy for a democracy?
Can I say, Parliament is generally a noisy place. There has to be debates, all that, right? As you very rightly said, there is a new culture growing, and I don't think it is in the best interest of the country, because Parliament is a place where they should discuss policies, all that, for the benefit of the country, for the people, in the interest of the people. And there appears to be no debate which is fruitful. There is no debate concerning the issues, because there must be a place, a set of people, members of Parliament who are elected representatives, to voice, the grievances of the masses. And if that happens, I think, because Parliament is a public institution of the public, and it belongs to the people, right? So the voice, or at least the noise they make, should be in the best interest of the people. But the noise they make is in their own interest, because they want to protect their whatever, themselves, and they fight so hard in order to, say, come to power and hold on to power and continue as long as in Parliament with power. So naturally, that's not in the best interest of the people. I think the system that prevails in Parliament is a system which is beneficial to them. And Parliament, now about a couple of years, 1.5 years ago, there was an estimate to say I think it's about 30 odd.
About 4 million per sitting.
4 million per sitting, yeah.
Yes.
Right? So naturally, it's a huge amount. Now, they had about 90 odd sittings during that particular year, and the cost was so huge. But looking at the expenses the people have to bear,
and the result that they get in
the
return.
outcome, the result, are you as a young man happy about the outcome? As an old person who had served Parliament, as you asked me, I have seen a better set of people long years ago. Unfortunately, that kind of caliber is not there in Parliament right now. And they just don't bother, or at least they don't take the trouble even to study whatever the subjects laid before Parliament. So this is a huge problem. Parliament is responsible not only for legislation, right? Having enacted laws, they have a duty to oversee whether the laws are being implemented the way they have enacted, right? So the laws are there in law books. Ultimately, nothing happens. So Parliament, I would say, can I say it has even failed?
Sir, in the recent times, of course, there was a rallying cry by many people here in Sri Lanka asking for a change in the system. They called it a system change. They said, we want a change in this system. Well, you are a man who has understood and been a part of the administrative sector in Sri Lanka at the highest echelons, which is Parliament, of course. So, in your experience, judging by the systems that we had in place in the past, like how did we go from a situation where we were in line with countries like Japan, countries like Singapore? We had Lee Kuan Yew come into Sri Lanka and saying, you know, I want to make Singapore like Sri Lanka. How did we go from that much of a great administrative framework, an administrative setup, to the current dismal state, if I may say, that we're in right now?
I think that's a very good question because, you know, we got our voting rights in 1931 and became a democracy, right? So in 1931, we had a cabinet of ministers, like let me also name CWW Kanangara and them. So you can imagine what a lot, you know, those cabinet ministers had done. Basically, CWW Kanangara will never his name can never be erased from the history for the contribution that he had made to this country. And that was so great, but unfortunately all that, now if I may say so, now even the social services, all that, right? I remember basic health, everything, right? From 1931 up to 1947, the best cabinet ministers were there in the country during that period, and thereafter again, like SWRD Bandanayake, all of them, they had done a lot. So our public sector was a very good model, and even at the time of independence, right? Say Henry Monk Mason Moore, the first governor, at least right, had said this was a model for the rest of the world, the developing countries too. Like what you said, you know, even when Lee Kuan Yew came here, he had boasted, he had said that it's such a good country that they would like to create a country, you know, like Sri Lanka.
Right.
And it reminded me, Professor John Hicks, who had come in early 50s, he had said this country has no problem. It has no issues of poverty. Actually, even we were fairly strong economically too at that time. It has no, what did he say? He had said there's no crying need of poverty and malnutrition, right? So generally things were much rosier. Even the public sector was so very strong. We boasted about our public sector, and we saw our superiors during that period. They were independent, you know, I mean the cream of the country, and they managed the country so very well. Unfortunately, all that was changed in 1972 with the introduction of the 72 Constitution, right? And just prior to that, they abolished the Senate. I always say a Senate is a place where, you know, it's like, I mean, it has to be there. It's a place where seniors could be accommodated. Now, even SLFP had recommended Senate in their proposal, but I don't say that way, because Parliament also, if that is the case, should be halved, bring down to about half. Simply adding the Senate won't help, because this has been
for more politicization, or for more room for political stooges.
Right,
maybe.
And now see, having devolved power in 1987, right, that was Act number 13th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment was to increase the number of members of Parliament in Parliament. Actually, having devolved power, there was no need at all to increase the composition of members, right? So 29 was added. It was 196 earlier, and 14th Amendment permitted national list, and their intention to say that was the way how they did it, to bring in educated people. Unfortunately, they have
not brought in educated people.
They have not brought in educated people, so it's sad. They tell you one thing and they do something else. That's not the way how a democratic government should be, you know,
should be run. Of course, speaking about the current state of Sri Lanka and Sri Lanka's parliament, we have seen governments come and go, and the framework or the administrative setup that is being set by one government is being changed by the government that precedes that. immediately. So we had, for example, we had the 17th Amendment to the Constitution introducing the Parliamentary Council, and then we had the 18th Amendment removing it. Then again we have the 19th Amendment bringing in the Parliamentary Council, and again the 20th Amendment removing it. Now all of this happened in the span of about 20 to 15 years.
2001, then 2002, now to about 18 years.
About, yes, about 18 years.
Yeah.
And this is a very small time when you especially speak about constitutional
Changes.
and fundamental constitutional change in the administrative framework of Sri Lanka. Do you think this is healthy? How badly has it affected us?
That again is a very good question, because 17th Amendment was approved by Parliament unanimously. Everybody agreed, and there was consensus there, because they felt the Constitution of 1978 wanted democratization, right? It was, power was
it was a general understanding among even the general public that the 1978 Constitution was an authoritarian one.
Yes, right.
I believe it was said that the only thing that the President of Sri Lanka couldn't do was change a woman into a man and a man into a woman.
Right, yes. So all that, I don't think, right, what happened in 2002 with the 17th Amendment, the biggest joke, now 18th Amendment, most of the people who supported the 17th Amendment supported the 18th Amendment to bring the process back again to the same old system, right? Now 18th Amendment was accordingly passed and put in the law books, in the Constitution, right? Then what happened, 19th Amendment was introduced. It was a little more democratic and it was a little better. Now, that was again supported by the same lot who were there continuously. I can't imagine, then what happened again, now the 20th, right? 20th, they made a huge cry to say that they wanted power to take the country forward. I don't know whether they are taking the country forward or backward, because 20th Amendment is really not an amendment, because that again unites and brings all that power, gives all that power to one man, individual president, right? That is not democracy. That system needs to be definitely altered, in the sense there has to be an amendment and revised, if possible immediately, because we see all that. Now see, it's a good question. I don't know whether I can locate now. Even in the manifesto, right? Vistas for what is this?
Vistas of prosperity and splendor.
Prosperity and splendor. It specifically says the period between the Yahapalana regime, 4.5 years, was so very bad, and it was the worst period, and the government ultimately had brought the country even below Afghanistan. That is what is stated in the manifesto, right? And they had said that after they are elected to power, they will strengthen the public sector, change all that and improve all that. And I don't believe the 20th Amendment was done in that direction. At least that you are able to take the country forward in that direction, right? If you really want to take a country forward, my view is you have to strengthen the public sector, clean up the public sector, because now see, under the 20th, there is room for abuse of power. Then they allow abuse of power even to various people. Now we saw about the sugar scam. And we saw about the coconut oil scam, right? We saw about, now there was another issue with regard to this manure, fertilizer, right? So naturally, this is huge sums of money, and the government lost all that revenue. The worst part is like fertilizer, even this coconut oil thing, right? Actually, it's so very dangerous to give people poisonous type of food, and ours is a country, we have seen the world over, right? I don't think anywhere in the world it happens in that way. It's a very sad state of affairs, to tell you. Basically, I think even people should understand that these things should not be tolerated at any cost, because this is your health, and you will, all that will affect our children too. So, and also government should understand they will definitely have a bigger health bill in time to come. So that's unnecessary expenditure. You must stop all this. If you could stop all that, I have a feeling that's in the best interest of the people.
And when you mean to say that the government lost all of this money, you mean the people of this country lost all of this money.
Definitely. You know, I always say the government, even the Yahapalana government, never wanted to punish the perpetrators of all those crimes. Actually, in this history, in the country, it was only Bandaranayake, right, who introduced the bribery department. That was Act number 40 of 1958. And he was able to, that was the kind of efficiency. He was slaughtered. It was a sin. We should have had, you know, his services. He was a visionary. Actually, there's again, you know, there's criticism about few things. All what I say is an administrator, a ruler, can make 80% things better, good, right? It can go, say, 20%
wrong.
Now, what happens here, 80% wrong, 20% good. So, that is not the way. Bandaranayake, whatever said and done, he did a lot. And he, within that period, now, he was the first person to punish legislators. And all that eventually, you know, civic rights were also removed. Since then, not a single person, except that Albert Silva in Gaul, for a small, I would say a petty thing, having a permit to transport kerosene, right? He lost his seat. Unfortunately, there are people who have robbed billions. Now, we investigated Sri Lankan Airlines, I know. If I remember right, it was about 120 odd billion loss continuously, right? And the account was overdrawn by about 75 billion, all those billion, not millions, right? So like that, there are all types of issues where monies have been robbed, powers have been sort of, misused, and monies, ultimately, it's public money. So I always say, if you don't punish the culprit, you punish the general public. So you can see the people being punished, and people pay for all that without food, without, you know, all that at the moment. It's very sad.
Definitely, and all these mistakes of the past have, of course, come to haunt us and will continue to haunt us. We will cross over to a short commercial break. We'll be back with more on the other side. Stay tuned. You're watching Newsline live.
Newsfirst, Newsline. Newsfirst, Newsline.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsline Live. We're in discussion with former Director of Administration of Parliament, Mr. Lassel de Silva. Sir, we were speaking about the functional structure of Sri Lanka. We were speaking about how people wanted a change in the system and how the system that we did have in Sri Lanka was changed, not for the better, but for worse, and which is the reason why we are in the fix that we are today. Yesterday, not only yesterday actually, this discussion has been there for quite some time after the April 21st attacks and the tug of war, if I may say, between the former president and the former prime minister. People were of the view that we need to get development going in this country by hook or by crook. They specifically said that we need even a Hitler to come and rule this country. These words, almost these exact same words were articulated yesterday by State Minister Dilum Amunugama. He said that if the president was more of a Hitler, the people wouldn't be blaming him and this government as much as they are doing right now. However, almost as a stroke of fate, ironically, the German ambassador to Sri Lanka tweeted yesterday saying that Adolf Hitler was responsible for death and despair, the death of millions, and he is no role model to any politician. How does development at any cost, even at the cost of having a Hitler at the helm, augur with this concept of democracy and proper administration?
You know, I will just start this way. What happened to Hitler ultimately? Hitler committed suicide, right?
What happened to Germany?
Yeah, what happened to Germany, right? We don't need a Hitler. We need a democratic ruler. Now, to say this way, ours is the oldest democracy in Asia. I would say ours is one of the oldest democracies in the whole world because it was in 1776. USA became a democracy, right, with a constitution, and the same constitution exists even today. Right?
With a few amendments.
With a few amendments, 20 odd amendments. Now here in our case, we have 20 amendments within about
40 years.
Yeah, I mean crazy. So now let's talk about Germany, right? They had about say 2, 3 whatever hiccups, and in 1945 with Hitler, they had to really, you know, because it was previously they were forming a democracy, and when Hitler came, he became a dictator. Unfortunately, it went through a very hard time, like the ambassador himself had stated. So in 1949 only they became a democracy, right? Now in 1931 we became a democracy. In 1918 even England became a democracy, right? In 1947, 48 Japan became a democracy. Why couldn't we do that? Unfortunately, our leaders did not know how to run a democratic government. That was basically after 70s. Now, democratic government needs a strong, transparent public sector, efficient, transparent public sector. I think I told you, when Mr. Bandaranaike came, within a period of 1 year, having enacted a law, he was able to deal with the legislators and even remove their civic rights. Now, imagine last government, they couldn't hold the elections, provincial elections, stating that there was a problem with regard to, you know, delimitation and all that. Those are all, I think, I don't know. It's not the right thing to do. You can't deny elections to the masses, right? It's democratic rights. Now they did that. Now even this time, if you say you need a democracy, no, I mean a dictator, it's very sad. We don't need a dictator. We don't need an autocrat to run a democratic government where we have experience. Unfortunately, since we didn't have good administrators or good rulers, a good administrator, a democratic ruler at the top, we have gone down. So to reverse the process, we need a good leader who can definitely run this country in a democratic way. If you run a democratic country, only we will be able to achieve economic growth. That's worldwide. I mean, that's how they have proved even globally. Not a single dictator has developed any country. Good example is here, Africa. Most of the dictators in Africa, they fill their own pockets and they never serve the countrymen. They were never able to develop the country. So it
With your years of experience, do you know of any example that we can draw from the international stage where a dictator has, developed a country, brought forward a country?
A dictator has developed a country.
Yes.
Actually, now see, when you talk about Libya, to some extent there was at least some benefits given to the people, right? So naturally there are 1 or 2 exceptions globally. Unfortunately, that should not be taken very seriously here because that doesn't reflect very well with regard to our people, because our people say one thing and they do something different once they are given power. Actually, we have to re-democratize the process. Now, that is like, now in countries like Sweden, why in the democratic world, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, New Zealand, those are the countries at the top. And that is because those are democratic countries, right? None of them, now it's about 166 countries globally, are democratic countries, right? Only a few countries, and all those countries which are not democratic are going through hard times. So why should we definitely go back to an era where we want a dictator? We don't want a dictator. We should never have a dictator. We want a democratic government. And now I'll tell you another example, right? In 1789, French Revolution, right? Why did they fight? They want a democracy, right? And establish a democracy. Then in 1799, another dictator came, Napoleon, right? He was there for about 13 years, and there was a democracy again, and his nephew came, another Napoleon, right? So naturally, none of the dictators have survived or done anything beneficial to the country. France in 1940s, back again to democracy. Up to now, they have run democratic governments and they have done extremely well. Even Germany, the same thing. So what I really want to say, if you have a dictator, they want dictatorship and they run dictatorial governments, not in the best interest of the country or the people. It could be seen the world over. That is basically the same reason why even countries like, say, most of the countries now see Korea, right? It's not a democratic country. What about South Korea? They are a lot better. So why should we go back and say we want a dictator? We don't want a dictator. Actually, to tell you frankly, the 20th Amendment is somewhat similar, because that ultimately has given powers not to, I mean, you have to give equal powers to everybody. The judiciary, the executive and the legislature should be allowed to run separately, and they should be given independence to operate on their own. If you concentrate power with one individual, where are we ultimately going to end up? We can see, I don't want to talk about the judiciary, what's happening, right? If you give powers in 1978, after the change of the constitution, right, we have seen the worst whatever in the judiciary. Prior to that, we saw a better judiciary. So what do we need? And we don't want a dictator with all that powers to given to one person. We want a democratic government, a democratic country. Then only our future, I mean, especially for your youngsters, your future will be better. I don't think we need a dictator at all.
Well, sir, of course, your knowledge on the administrative framework of Sri Lanka, and especially the history of Sri Lanka, where we were and how we developed at that time, and where the turning point was and how we got to where we are today, was very insightful. And I would, of course, like to thank you for sharing those information on this show tonight for our viewers as well. Of course, we have a provincial council election coming up, and subsequently, of course, the democratic process that we do still have in this country will continue with the general election and the presidential election coming up in due course. And at the end of the day, it is, of course, up to the general public of Sri Lanka to weigh these factors against one another and decide for themselves, not to just make a simple decision, but to make an informed decision, because this decision that you make in the future will continue to affect generations that are unborn, your children, your grandchildren, and the future of the country as a whole. Once again, thank you very much, Mr. Lester De Silva,
thank you very much.
Former Director of Administration of Parliament in Sri Lanka, for joining us on our show. And thank you very much, of course, to all our viewers out there for tuning in on this very special day, the Sinhala and Tamil New Year. Once again, before we go, on behalf of the entire News First team and the production team of Newsline Live, I would like to take this opportunity to wish each and every one of you a very, very happy Sinhala and Tamil New Year. Until we meet again, take care and God bless.
News First, Newsline.